Orville Yanke Award. And for those of you that are not familiar with it, I'll give you a bit of a background on it. The Orville Yanke Award is a memorial award named in honor of one of Southern Alberta's earliest and most ardent soil conservation leaders. Medicine Hat farmer Orville Yanke played a pivotal role in founding both the Southern Alberta Conservation Authority and the Southern Alberta Applied Research Association, the two organizations that merged in 2012 to form Farming Smarter. Since 2019, Farming Smarter has presented the Orville Yanke Award annually to celebrate a farmer or researcher whose contributions have significantly impacted soil conservation research and extension in Southern Alberta. The criteria are they live and or work in Southern Alberta, they're involved with community and freely share information to build farm sustainability and profitability, and also have a direct and measurable contribution to conservation. Some of the people who have received it over the last, I think it's 16 years now, is it not? My math is right, Ken? Sure, he says. Don Wentz, Richard Fritzler, Rick Swihart, Don McClellan, Ross McKenzie, Ron Howard, Rob Dunn, Ike Lanier, Ron Svains, Bob Blackshaw, Art Bird, Claudia Sheedy, Laverne Gill, Josh Beck. And that brings us to this year's award winner. Is John Kolk, sitting over there. Congratulations, John. I've known John for a number of years. I'm happy to call him a friend, but he's also a client. We've worked together for a number of years. He's been farming actually on the family farm since 1989, on a family farm that was established in 1956. So poultry, cattle, land, those sort of things. He's presently operating a farm with his wife, and they're transitioning to the children to take over, the next generation. John's been involved in a lot of different organizations and things over the past that have to do with agriculture and those sort of things, so that's a great thing. John's also the type of person who's more than willing to share what he's learned. He holds tours on his farms, lets people see where he's spent the money to learn what he knows, so these other people don't have to do that. And in today's competitive atmosphere, that is quite a difficult thing to do, because everybody's competing for the same land next door, whether they rent it or buy it. And if you're spending money to find a better way of, doing something that's hopefully giving you a better return, you've already got that investment in there. You're willing to share that freely with your neighbors. That does put you at a bit of it doesn't give you the competitive advantage you could have had. So John, why don't you come up here? And I'm going to shut up and let him talk. So again, congratulations, John.
Thanks, George.
You want this on there, or do you want to hold it?
Yeah, well, thanks, George. I guess I thank you to the committee for awarding me the Orville Yanke Award for 24. It is an honor to be recognized by industry leaders and peers for my activities in the ag sector. It is with mixed feelings, though, that I accept the award. It's a bit of an intimidating group to be part of. I at least see one of them here today. Previous award recipients have promoted or researched or introduced important conservation practices to Southern Alberta agriculture. I've always considered myself more of a farmer than an innovator. Not so much on the breakthrough side of innovation as someone who asks questions, searches for solutions, and then tries to implement them. I started my farming career as a young child on my grandparents' and then my parents' dairy, chicken, and crop farm. Kind of an 80-acre mixed farm in the 60s. One of my jobs was to push the dairy cow holding pen clean with a snow shovel every night after milking. It was kind of a slippery, smelly job, and the holding pen had about 2 inches of slop from the cows waiting to be milked. The faster I could push that slop out, the quicker I could go out and play before we had to go to bed. Holding on to that handle and pushing was a lot of work for a little kid, and it seemed inefficient to me. So I ran my zipper down and put the the handle in my pants because, it was lower down. I didn't have to, and found out that worked pretty good. The faster I could push the slop out to the gutter, the better things would be. So I zipped my fly down, put the handle in my pants so I could push faster. Better leverage, lower center of gravity. It worked great for a few passes, and off I pushed. The last pass, I was at full speed, hit a crack in the concrete, and the handle blew through the back of my pants, and I fell flat on my face. So my first farm innovation landed me with a busted out pants and my face down in the shit. But that didn't stop me permanently from trying to improve efficiency and searching for better ways to do things around the farm. And there continue to be some successes and some failures. Farming for me has always been about trying to do things better. Seeing a problem, trying to understand it, finding possible solutions, and then implementing them, and then checking the results over time. As we kept farming, it also became important figuring out what were the barriers that kept us from implementing those solutions. When I came back to farming in 1989, my brother and I committed to being good stewards of the land and livestock and the resources that we had to work with. That meant solving problems, reducing barriers, and implementing solutions. That led us both in different ways to work on our farm, in our community, and in commodity organizations. It also led to attending educational opportunities, researching leading producers, and working with experts in government and private industry. We also had guidance from our parents for their 30 years of failures and successes of farming in southern Alberta. My commodity board work led me to helping set up Alberta Farm Animal Care, quality assurance programs in a couple of sectors, and also Alberta Environmental Sustainable Agriculture Council back in the 90s for some of you old gray hairs there. You remember that? So I was involved in that and chaired that organization for a bit. The late 90s, we're starting to see farmers being pushed away from government experts and also pushing for more independence from them. So that sense of father knows best government was breaking down in the 90s, partly because of lack of dollars and just the changes that were starting to occur. So there was a double push, and industry had to take on more of its own responsibilities. Societal pressures, perception of farming and how we were doing our job, and risk management requirements led us to setting up the Environmental Farm Plan Company. I chaired the originating board, and we delivered about 10,000 completed self-assessed environmental farm plans over 5 years. And that program continues to some extent to this day. I think, Graham, are you still involved in it? You were, though, yeah. So, some of these things, if you're not assessing and measuring, it's really hard to start driving changes, and it's really hard to be talking to your broader community and your buyers about what you're doing. It also led me to some opportunities to serve on pre-consult committees that ended up with our Water for Life in Alberta here, also the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, some of it good, some of it bad. Both of them are province-wide rules that we work under and at some point had to be updated. I found that there was often more value in the room steering or trying to steer government than fighting them after the rules were drafted. And even though sometimes these are frustrating committees to be on, it forces you to hear something a little wider and more differently. But having effective voices at those committees from the farm community, I think, is important, and I continue to encourage people that are involved. Don't forget that the environment or culture that we work in is often driven by policy and also corporate policy, but often it is government policy. Another outcome of my community board work or commodity board work has been working with Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute for the last 17 years. Because of agriculture's footprint, we impact the natural habitat and biodiversity, and at some point are going to be and are in the crosshairs of both government and sometimes the non-government organizations. You can't work on the land without impacting, whether it's grazing or crop farming, or forestry for that matter. We do impact what's going on. Just look at Europe. They've impacted their natural landscapes in a way greater way than we ever have. And yet sometimes we're the ones that are perceived as being a problem. So with the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute, I felt it was important that agriculture had a voice at that organization. We actually check on 20-mile grids across the province every 5 years or 6 years to see what's happening there and what changes are happening over time. Even down at this point to soil mites and at some point some of the carbon, organic matter and carbon. So being involved in that level doesn't directly land on my farm, but it does impact agriculture because we have a better story to tell and we can work with information and baseline information rather than perceptions of how agriculture is doing their job or not doing it. By 2012, the local people in their wisdom determined I was not the person to be a provincial politician, so I refocused my energies on crop farming. Problems like water use efficiency, wind erosion on row crop farming led to some solutions like more manure on the land. I've often been here to say that shit's the answer. The strip tillage, variable rate irrigation, subsurface irrigation, and even cover cropping. I can't say that we've got the solutions all down, certainly on our operation, but I will say this, the land we've worked with is in better shape than when we took it over. One of the measurements I use, and my agronomist has helped show us that, is that a 10-year increase in organic matter, and it's kind of a rough average on a few thousand acres, from 1.5 to 2.5%. Unfortunately, I don't see my banker here today, but if I could only get credit for all that hard work, that would be great. But we do have to be willing to measure the improvements that we're bringing forward. And I think that's pretty critical. We see a lot of things happening, but if you're not able to measure it somehow, it's hard to turn it into resources on the farm. One trait that seems common to many of the previous Orville Yanke recipients has been to see a problem, to work to solve a problem, and to share those solutions. I guess in that sense, I do stand in my small way with the group that went before me. And knowing me, I do want to make a couple of comments because you guys have to be polite for a few minutes, and I never want to waste a working microphone. So when it comes to agricultural problems, the size of the advertising budget does not correlate to the value of the solution on the farm. And I think too often we're seeing some very high-priced advertising programs, whether it's on biologicals or certain other things, that don't necessarily land on the farm in a way that gets a return on the farm. Regional and crop differences require regional and crop-specific solutions. One size does not fit all. You can't go up in the Peace Country and start making decisions for what works here in Southern Alberta and vice versa. And agriculture is local, it's land-based, and it's going to continue to be that. And I think the hope to bring it up and say, hey, we can deal with all the research extension from a very provincial level or a national level just doesn't work. Sharing successes and failures, and George talked about this a bit, are a requirement for better solutions. Not every conservation solution can be monetized And I think Robert asked that question, how do you make money on this? But some of them can, and for some of you students here, getting it right for the farmer and the land can provide some really lucrative opportunities. There continues to be opportunities. No-till is not the end of the conservation story here in southern Alberta. And I think building more resilient food production systems requires both private and public support. There's a private benefit for us producers and for consumers, but there's a public benefit for the environment and government. And the demands for public benefits are increasing. We're being obligated to do more and more, whether it's ESG for the bankers or insurance companies. We're being asked to do more and more of that, but we're not necessarily finding the opportunities to monetize that. So I think those demands continue, but public support has definitely been eroding. You heard Dan saying, I'm 70 years old and I've been working on this for quite a few years. What's coming up behind me? I think that's an important question to be asking yourselves, but also your commodity organizations and governments. We need the DANs and others to be doing the kind of work to help us understand better how to be sustainable agriculture producers. So for myself and everyone here, there's still a lot of problems to be identified, addressed, and shared in the exciting world of food production. Stewardship is a long-term commitment. It's not a destination. And I think that's important. It's something you got to work at every day on your operation, working with partners, with experts. So I guess thanks again for the recognition. Don't expect me to stop asking questions or landing face down in the mud.
Before you go, John, Jamie, I'm assuming you want to keep this for, or
No, you keep it.
before you go, John, is there anybody?
Dust things like that.
Does anybody have any questions for John? We have a couple of minutes for lunch. Sir, thank you, thank you. We have a microphone? While they're getting a microphone, I want to tell a little story about John. He mentioned things about shit. And I remember talking one time because we were going all over the soil test results and everything. And he says, George, you realize I spent $250,000 on shit this year? So he's dedicated. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, traveling through the three prairie provinces, I realized, and meeting with the producers, that we're much more advanced technologically, environmentally, than what the public out east perceives us to be. Now, and they're getting further, general public basically is getting further and further removed from agriculture. They may relate to some grandpa they visited 50 years ago, but that doesn't give them the information that what we're working with today. How do we get our message across to the public and the politicians so that we're not steamrolled by the environmentalists and so on, just like the oil and gas industry has been?
You know, Robert, I think you really address a big issue. I mean, you look at the votes in Canada, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, there's the numbers. You look at the votes in the farm community, there's 1%, 2%. Policies made by the numbers. And that's why the importance of getting our voice out, but you have to get the story out with real facts, but also understand the feelings of who's out there. So I think somebody talked about Paul Martin, who who, once he understood some of the needs that the scientific community had, and he was in a position to make a difference, actually we've seen some action. We don't have those articulate voices for the hard work and the sustainability that we do in agriculture today. It's hard to get out in front of, whether it's the Minister of Environment, Minister of Health, Minister of Agriculture. They tend to be fairly supportive. The how on that is, I think you keep doing a good job, measuring what you do, and being willing to report on it. We try and open our farm up for visits. We've had teachers out. Open farm days occurs. You have to kind of show people almost one at the time, if you're anywhere near a larger community, what we're doing. My favorite story is we took, about 600 people from across Alberta, and they were in the Ag Service Boards. And in Alberta, we've got counties, and each of them have an Ag Service Board. We had a tour in the county of Lethbridge back in 2002, and I was on one of the buses and so we had 45 people, all of them somewhat associated with agriculture, and we're going from Monarch to Turin. We're about halfway, and this lady pipes up and says, "When are we going to get to Feedlot Alley?" I said, "You've been in the middle of Feedlot Alley for the last half an hour." Their concept of a feedlot alley was a back alley in Regina with garbage along the side. Here we have, a whole bunch of farms all over the place. But I think the other piece of this is agriculture has to own up or man up to the problems that we have, whether it's pesticide overuse, fertilizer overuse. We got to own up and say this is what we're doing to work on it. Because otherwise it gets mandated on top of us, and that's why you see farmers in Italy and Spain and France driving tractors and throwing manure in the front steps of the Parliament building. So I think we can do a good job, but it does take an effort by each of us on our farm and also when we reach out.
Thank you, John. But I do think we have a very articulate advocate for what's happening on farms here. So, thank you. With that,